The explanation is simple. My father's older brother was a victim of rebellion and adventure magazines, and was, at odd times, a merchant seaman, a prospector for gold and precious metals, and finally a geologist. Late in the Great Depression, Paul was somewhere in the interior of Brazil, from which he returned, after squandering most of his earnings in Rio, to the farm with some presents, including a 78 RPM record of the sambas of that period. One of the sambas, in Portuguese of course, was Estrela d'Alva, or Morning Star, and my parents loved the song. Naomi, my mother, told me that on warm summer evenings, she and my father would put the record on the Victrola and dance up and down the big front porch of the farmhouse. My Uncle Paul had taught them what he said was the samba before he disappeared again. I just now thought that you can only meet a man at the level of his intentions. When my father and mother met and courted in the 30s, the intentions were clear. They were both from fourth-generation farm families, and the point was to marry and to continue traditions that had made their predecessors reasonably happy. This is not to say that they were simple-minded people in bib overalls and flour-sack gingham dress. There were several thousand acres of corn and wheat, Herefords, hogs, even a small slaughterhouse that at one time supplied prime beef to certain restaurants in faraway Chicago, St. Louis, and Kansas City. From scrapbooks Mother has stored, there are records of their trips to Chicago, New Orleans, Miami, and once to New York City, which was my mother's favorite. From World War II, when my father was a fighter pilot stationed in England, there is a photo of him with 3 gentlemen in front of the Hereford Registry in Hereford, England. He's in a jaunty hat and looks rather like one of the early photos of Howard Hughes. As Naomi would say, or prate, blood will tell, and his unstable streak came out in his passion for airplanes. He was not called up, but re-enlisted for the Korean War because he wanted to learn to fly jet fighters. So, between the ages of 5 and 9, I knew my father, and I have still not exhausted the memories of those years. Beryl Markham said that when she stopped in Tunis on the way back to Europe in her small plane, she met a prostitute who wanted to go home, but didn't know where home was because she had been taken from her parents at age 7. She only knew that in her homeland there were tall trees and it was occasionally cold. But I'm not one to live or subsist on memory, treating it as most do, the past and future as an encapsulated space or nodule we walked into and then out of, rather than a continuum of the life we have already lived and will live. What was my father, really? Genes provide the fragilest of continuities. On the farm, we had a small plane called a Stinson Voyager. We'd go for Sunday rides when the weather was right. If I had been sick and out of school, my father would tell me I'd feel better or be well by the time we landed, and I believed him. I liked seeing the water birds on sandbars in the Missouri River, the way they flew up in clouds, then landed again when our immense shadow passed. What upsets me is the terrifying and inconsolable bitterness of life. At close range in certain friends, and particularly in my sister, who regards her midlife as an Arctic prison, though she lives in Tucson. She's never been given much to going out of doors. She lives in a fine home, with a gray and white interior, backed up against the Catalinas, though she has never walked in these mountains. I thought of her yesterday at daylight when I walked the beach. Someone had spray-painted the word menace on the benches in Palisades Park and on the steps going down to the beach, and somehow on a highway overpass. I stopped counting at 20. Fortunately, most lunatics don't have the vigor of Charles Manson. I was interested in someone who spent a whole night spray-painting menace virtually in the face of the Pacific Ocean. Perhaps this vandal is the flip side of my sister. It is somewhat a mystery to me how the rich can feel so utterly fatigued and victimized. She drifts back and forth without specific density across the line of what she thinks is the unbearable present. But then she surprised me this March, during Easter, when my mother and I visited. I asked her how it was possible to live so thoroughly without nouns. At that moment, she was waiting for the single drink she allowed herself each day at 6. "Why don't you save up for 6 days and have 7 drinks on Sunday?" Naomi asked. My mother does not stand back.